Good morning. It's Wednesday, August 28th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 327 days old. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Exciting stuff yesterday. The IDF saved a hostage from Hamas captivity, a Bedouin father of 11, no less. Two other Bedouin Arabs, however, a father and son, are among the remaining hostages who are still presumed to be alive in Gaza. The body of a third Bedouin is still being held by the Hamas terrorist organization. And yet another Bedouin, Hisham al-Sayed, has actually been held captive by Hamas in Gaza since 2015. Personally, I don't think any of this has received enough attention in our media, but that's what we try to do here at FDD Morning Brief. We try to highlight things that others may not every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So please do keep tuning in. Our guest this morning is Assaf Orion. He's a retired brigadier general in the IDF. He works for the Israeli think tank INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. Right now, he's an international fellow with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy here in D.C. I've worked on China-Israel issues with Assaf in the past, but today we're going to be asking him to primarily weigh in on what's been happening in the Middle East, but I do want to get to that China issue as well. Should be a good conversation. When the Israelis found Qaid Farhan al-Qadi yesterday, there were celebrations across Israel, the United States, and beyond, but not me. I was angry. I obviously wasn't angry because al-Qadi had been saved. I was angry because of where he was found, in a Rafah tunnel. I'll give you one guess where the IDF saved two other hostages in a daring rescue operation back in February. Yep, Rafah. Now guess where the Biden administration repeatedly warned the IDF not to operate for fear of a humanitarian catastrophe that never materialized. Rafah again. Now guess where the Egyptians have angrily warned Israel not to deploy, purportedly out of fear that refugees might cross over into the Sinai Peninsula. Ding, ding, ding. You guessed it, Rafah. Consider this. How many more hostages would have been recovered if the IDF took Rafah when it wanted to back in early spring? How many tunnels snaking into Egypt could Israel have destroyed to cut Hamas's supply lines? How many senior Hamas leaders could have been captured or killed? It's impossible to know, obviously, but I question whether Gaza City was Hamas's nerve center in Gaza. I don't think it was Khan Yunis either. Rafah was probably the most crucial territory for the IDF to conquer, and Israel had to fight to get there with its allies. So here's my advice to the Israelis. Do what you got to do. Stay in Rafah, find more hostages, find more tunnels, and finish this thing. Finally, please and thank you. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the United Nations is getting ready to launch a polio vaccination campaign in Gaza this weekend. First, a bit of context. In July, the World Health Organization said that it found traces of polio in sewage samples from Gaza. At that point, the WHO warned about a possible outbreak, but said that no one had contracted the virus yet. Unfortunately, that is no longer true. Earlier this month, the WHO confirmed the first case of polio in Gaza in 25 years. 640,000 children in Gaza are set to get vaxxed. On Sunday, 1.25 million doses of the polio vaccine arrived in the Gaza Strip as part of a coordinated effort between the IDF, the WHO, and other UN agencies. And after some alarm in the media about the impact of certain Israeli evacuation orders, a senior UN official said that the vaccine campaign remains on track. Headline 2, Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei endorsed the resumption of nuclear talks. In televised remarks, Khamenei said that Tehran is ready to work with the, quote, enemy, end quote. That's regime speak for the United States. And he added that there is, quote, no barrier, end quote, to engaging with Washington. However, it remains to be seen how much flexibility the Iranians will exercise if and when they return to the negotiating table. A word of warning. My colleague Andrea Stricker warns that we shouldn't fall for Khamenei's charade. Tehran has had 4 years under President Biden to clinch a new deal, but has instead used that time to march rapidly toward the nuclear threshold. My assessment is that the regime is getting ready to bilk our hapless nuclear negotiators out of billions of dollars in sanctions relief. They have 5 months to do it, and the White House is desperate to save its legacy. Seems optimal for Iran, that is. And headline 3, Hamas isn't the only Iranian proxy that exploits civilians as human shields. Hezbollah does that too. According to the IDF, 90% of the rockets and drones that Hezbollah fired at Israel on Sunday morning were launched from civilian areas in Lebanon. The IDF published infographics showing launch sites near mosques, schools, UN posts, and even a gas station. This is a deliberate strategy, folks. It's designed to maximize civilian harm. It's a hallmark of Iran's proxies, and it flies in the face of international law. Israel, meanwhile, continues to find evidence of Hamas using the tactic of human shields in Gaza. On Monday, the IDF found anti-tank missiles, munitions, and knives next to a crib in central Gaza. If only there was some international court that could hold these terrorists to account. Right. The ICC and ICJ are too busy stalking Israel on bogus war crimes charges. Well, Monday's program featured Ehud Yari, an Israeli journalist affiliated with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Today's program will feature another Israeli affiliated with the Washington Institute, Assaf Orion. Assaf, as I mentioned, is a retired IDF brigadier general. He works for the INS think tank right near the campus of Tel Aviv University. Assaf knows a lot of things about a lot of things, so it's my pleasure to talk to him right now about the Middle East, among other things, live here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome, Assaf Orion.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Boker Tov. Okay, I want to go around the horn with you and get your assessment of some of these fronts where Israel is fighting. So let's start with Gaza. In your assessment, where are we now and where are we going?
As it seems, we're in phase 3 of the IDF campaign. We're now into incursions and raids into places where our residual rocketry, resurging Hamas units. Most of those have been dismantled. A lot of tunnel destruction operations are ongoing. We're getting into places where we weren't before, like Bir el-Balach. The population evacuation operations are going quite well. And as you said, there are several elements there to be straightened up. One of them is the logistical tunneling going between Egypt and Rafah, which is basically the lifeline or part of the lifeline of Hamas economy and ability to build up. We certainly have the hostage situation, above the whole sphere. And this is addressed by both punctual operations, bringing back singular people, only single numbers, and we still have 108 both alive and dead to salvage.
And is it your assessment that Hamas is nearing the end, or do you think that this is a long battle? My assessment is that the leadership is thinned out, that the fighting ranks are also thinned out, the supply lines appear to be cut off. This does not look like an organization that's got a bright future. Would you disagree with that?
I think we need to set our expectations right. The war goals were to remove the threat from Gaza. Hamas, as a terror army, lost most of its capabilities. It's most of its battalions, most of its production capabilities, a lot of tunnels, a lot of rockets. You see what they managed to shoot in return for the death of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. Only remnants of some fireworks. They lost a lot of capability. Waging another October 7th campaign is out of their reach now. They cannot do it. But this is not a standing target. It's a moving target. They are going to rebuild, rearm, remobilize. There's no shortage of angry young men in Gaza. That's a resource which is very rich. Gaza is rich with that. So I think we need to adopt a long game approach. It will take a decade or two. It doesn't mean a war whose length is a decade or two. It needs a long campaign with different intensity, which Israel can endure with its national capabilities.
I've heard a lot of people say that this will be sort of like what Israel does in the West Bank, where we actually saw some activity overnight, where you have forces punching in, punching out. doing what it needs to do in order to keep Israel safe, and that freedom of activity is likely going to be key. All right, I want to ask you the same, if we can. Let's try to get an assessment of what's going on with Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful proxy based in Lebanon.
It's an important point to start with, that Hezbollah is the flagship of that enterprise. And that's actually the most significant military threat to Israel on its borders, much more significant than the remains of Hamas. It tells us that we need to approach it in a theater of war, or a comprehensive view of the war picture, to prioritize the threats, to prioritize the responses, to phase what needs to be phased out, phased in, and so on. Hezbollah for Israel still has the following challenges to offer. It's an open frontier with daily shooting. It's a near border problem with assault, the Radwan units assault into Israel threat, and direct fires attacks and short range rockets. There is a depth ballistic arsenal problem, including in tunnels, and precision. There's the regeneration capability coming from Iran. There are the linkages to Gaza and to Iran itself, and with Palestinians fighting from Lebanon. And all of this is under the canopy of a fake state providing the cover for the Hezbollah military enterprise. So it's a complex situation. We need to decide which problem to face first. How does it relate to what we do in Gaza in the sense of phasing? When do you escalate? When do you de-escalate? We've just seen the battle day on Sunday, very concise, very limited, both sides constraining themselves, and seemingly, the choreography is okay. We have to do this, but let's not get out over the top now. But Israel's, for the long term, Israel's, let's say, readiness or acceptability of living under the volcano of Hezbollah's arsenal, waiting for it to decide when to go against us, I think this readiness thinned out dramatically after October 7th.
Interesting. All right. Well, I want to move on now. I want to ask you about Iran, because of obviously, Israelis call Iran head of the snake. They are the ones that are directing all of this proxy activity, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Hamas. Of course, we can talk about the Houthis or the Shiite militias in Iraq as well. But the Iranians were set to attack Israel. They appear to be deterred, probably by the U.S. assets that have been ordered to the region, maybe deterred, maybe in small part or in large part by the pinpoint strikes that Israel has been carrying out with incredibly exact intelligence. But where do you see things going here? I mean, I do note that the Israeli government has adopted a more holistic approach of actually being dedicated to bring down the regime. But do you see that as even something that's feasible in the short term or medium term? Long term, I get. But what are we doing now and over the next couple of months? What do you think the Israelis, the U.S., others are going to do here to counter Iran?
I think you pointed it right, that I wouldn't say the head of the snake, because the system is not snake-like. It's a networked partnership with definite functions. Iran is definitely the strategic leader of that network. It's a logistic provider. It's a military rear, I would say, that provides all those proxies. Like who would imagine ballistic missiles in Yemen? It's not the first place coming to mind, and all this military technology. So we all need to adopt, I think, a more systemic and systematic way of thinking about the problem. It's not a Gaza ceasefire or how do you de-escalate in Lebanon. It's the question of how, after doing all those urgent action, you actually disrupt the system in order for it to stop regenerating the problems. It's not just Israel in the crosshairs. It's Saudi Arabia, as we saw in 2019. It's the UAE. It's international shipping. It's things flying over Iraq and over Jordanian airspace. So you understand that the whole region and beyond the region, because the Houthis are talking about developing missiles going to Europe. Hezbollah is threatening Cyprus. So it's not just an Israel problem. Now we need to do all this, keeping in mind that Iran is already a threshold state on the nuclear side. It's very close to getting nuclear when it decides to, or when it thinks that America is diverted or otherwise distracted. At the same time, we need to have a global view. These are players. Iran is among the players looking for a strategic crisis to advance their own crisis. Think about Ukraine, think about Taiwan, and the nuclear action in North Korea. So I think we need to adopt a multi-layer understanding of the problem. Israel is building up to tackle the parts of the problem it can. I think regime change is a bit of a tall order. You know, each of us enjoy the intricacies of their own politics at home. Now imagine meddling in other nations' politics. It's a tall order. And I think we all need to adopt a comprehensive approach which takes into account the nuclear, the military, the diplomatic, the economic, all the political, the domestic. All of these needs to be orchestrated really well. And unlike Vegas, what happens in Iran doesn't stay in Iran.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll just say this. I see right now an administration that's desperate to head off a nuclear Iran, and I'm concerned that there's negotiations going on. We know that the Qataris have been shuttling back and forth between us and the Iranians. And I think there's room for maybe more disastrous diplomacy along the lines of what we saw in 2013 and 2015, when the U.S. yielded a lot of sanctions relief to the Iranians that I think ultimately ended up paving the way and funding some of the chaos that we're seeing right now. So I've got real concerns there. And actually, on that point, I want to ask you about the U.S.-Israel relationship. It's had its ups and downs, right? I mean, over the last 11 months, we've seen very close ties and the delivery of significant amounts of weapons. But we've also seen real tension between the Netanyahu government and the Biden administration. We've seen the withholding of weapons. We've seen, questions raised about war crimes charges, which of course never bore fruit. But there's been a lot of ups and downs here, this roller coaster. Where do you think we are at this point in the U.S.-Israel relationship with this kind of lame duck presidency that we have with President Biden? Kind of a lot of questions right now with Kamala Harris. But at the same time, I see a U.S. that is attempting really to establish deterrence right now in the region. That's got to be welcomed in Israel, isn't it?
As far as U.S. politics go, I won't go into it. I can say a lot about my own country's politics. I'll tell you a secret. It's not a full harmony as it seems from the outside. It's not a homogeneous government, let alone the whole political sphere. We're divided, we're disputed. We have a lot of very ferocious arguments inside Israel. But I think despite what you may hear in Israel, if you have a cool-headed, balanced judgment of the U.S. role in Israel's national security, I think there has seldom was a situation like that when Israel enjoys really a steadfast support on the political level, in the UN, on the strategic level, on the defense level, on the military level, on the logistical level. If anybody asked, okay, who's our friends and who's our enemies and who are the bystanders, America is unquestionably our number one irreplaceable partner. Now, there's a lot of questions on what will be in the future. By the way, people say, okay, but they, as you said, they argued about Rafah. They have different priorities. Okay, we're unlike the rumors, we're not governing Washington. Washington is the capital of a sovereign state with its own interests and priorities, and we understand that. But the strategic support that Israel is getting from the US is second to none. And it's essential to what we are doing, from our force buildup to which who produces the planes that the Israeli Air Force uses, who protects most of our rear from Houthi attacks, who coalesced or led the coalition of mid-April Iranian attack, who now invests so much or so many military assets of its other at the expense of other priorities in the Middle East, not the first priority in a good day of America. It's rather China. So when you bundle up all that, I think the Israeli nation should stand up and salute. It doesn't mean that we need to comply with every thought coming from America, but we need to be able to sit together, to discuss the differences, to decide what's right now and what's later. Many times phases are the answer, and to keep on going with this unbelievably successful strategic partnership.
I fully agree, and I think you said it very well. You mentioned China, and that's my last question for you here today for this discussion. You and I have had some fascinating discussions about China and Israel over recent years, and we sometimes disagreed. Most of the time, I think we did agree, but where are you now on that? China has obviously chosen a side in this war, and that is not the side of Israel. So does this change any of your views about Israeli trade with Beijing?
Not even America stopped its trade with Beijing, although it's its number one pacing challenge. And I'm polite because in other venues, people say, well, that's our enemy. Yesterday or today, Syria and China said the US is our common enemy. So Israel doesn't see China as an enemy. We have a full list of our own problems. We don't want this size of a superpower on our enemy list. Also, there was a great hype in the last decade about Israel's relations with China. Right now, and we need to look at it as an historical trend or historical vector, Israel and China's relations are at the lowest point since the establishment of diplomatic relations. And you can go index by index, metric by metric, from investment to projects to incoming Chinese citizens into Israel, less than about 400 every month. It used to be 155,000. At our peak of times, we had 1,355 students from China in Israel. That's compared to 400,000 in America. So the numbers are very low. Flights have been depleted almost. El Al cut a lot of its flights there. I flew a few months ago to China and back. The flight back was half empty. So you see the relations thinning out. You don't see delegations. You hardly see diplomatic ties. There was a talk about the Prime Minister's visit to China. That's last year's snow. And I would say the most interesting point is the Israeli public opinion. In 2019, Pew poll found out that 66% of the Israelis hold positive positions towards China. That was, highly notable. Nowadays, and the INSS did a poll of itself, 57% see China as either an unfriendly or a hostile country. Now, the low point that I've described goes back to three main, I would say, shaping factors. One is the great power competition, like the beginning was 2017 national security strategy of the Trump administration and the ongoing tensions between the US and China. Then COVID in 2020, and then came China's position since the beginning of this war, backing up Hamas, backing up Iran, criticizing Israel viciously. Like, that's not how friends behave, and Israelis in war are sensitive to that. That's a serious blow to China's reputation in Israel, which I think in a great part was based upon ignorance more than actual knowledge. And the final blow was a wave of anti-Semitism in Chinese social media, which is a very bad sign in a sense of Israel-China relations, although China denies it has an anti-Semitism problem.
Interesting. Got to say, I think it's probably good that we've seen that sort of wake-up call, that poll change, those numbers changing in Israel. I think that's probably a good thing. But, that's one that I think you and I will continue to chat about and watch. In the interim, I want to thank you, Assaf Orion, for joining us live today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you very much.
Always interesting talking to that guy. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Seth Frantzman has cranked out yet another piece in the Jerusalem Post examining Hezbollah's protracted war of attrition against Israel. Following that thwarted attack by Hezbollah over the weekend, Nasrallah is downplaying the urgency of further aggression. He claims that Hezbollah will persist in its assaults until a ceasefire in Gaza is achieved. That means the equation hasn't changed and war in the north remains a real possibility. My colleague Hussein Abdul Hussein has a piece in the Asia Times on Israel's successful preemptive strike in Lebanon, as Hezbollah attempts to save face by claiming victory and presenting their failed strike as merely the first stage of revenge for Israel's assassination of Fuad Shukr. Hussein asserts that the prospect of an inevitable war should compel Hezbollah to reconsider its position and accept a ceasefire with Israel. I'm not holding my breath. And finally, FDD's Max Meislich has an article in The Hill highlighting the urgent need for Washington to impose sanctions on the businesses supporting Venezuela's dictator, Nicolas Maduro. He argues that following the recent sham election that allowed Maduro to retain power, sanctions are more crucial than ever. The United States must stand firmly against tyranny and work to defend democracy, especially in our backyard. All right, that's going to do it for today, folks. Another one in the books. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD, and support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for yet another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. We will have Lucas Tomlinson from Fox News on the program, a good reporter, in fact, very good reporter. Should be another great episode. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.